What's going on, everybody? It's your boy Jimmy James 59, and today I'm going to be doing a Civ concept overview on the Khwarazmians. I previously did one on the Georgians and said that if the feedback to that video was good and y'all liked it, then I'd do another one, and well, here we are. So y'all came through, and I encourage you for this video to do the same. If you like it, definitely drop a like. If you have some thoughts you want to share, leave a comment. And if you're new to the channel, welcome. I hope you'll subscribe so that way you can get notified when I upload other videos. That being said, let's jump into things. So, I'm going to tell you where we're going here, but basically we're going to be covering a little bit of history, and then we're going to be thinking a lot more about how this civilization would play out in Age of Empires 2 DE. And that tells you a lot about the purpose of this video. While we're going to cover some history, it's not a historical analysis because we're trying to figure out if the Khwarazmians would be a good fit in Age of Empires 2. And I have a big picture and sort of a small picture here. In a big picture, I am thinking about the civilization as part of a Masters of Eurasia DLC that would include the Georgians. And I'm also thinking about balance a lot. And so we're not going to ignore history, but we want history to guide how the civilization looks, but also not determine it. So that's the purpose of this video. Brief historical summary. The Khwarazmians were a Turco-Persian empire that were around for a little under 2 centuries. Some of the unique characteristics include a small number of largely populated cities and a lot of skilled craftsmanship. There's some ceramics that still exist today that are just beautiful, good blacksmithing, that kind of thing. Militarily, a number of conflicts, most noteworthy fighting against the Seljuk Turks, the Gurrid dynasty, the Karakitai. The Khwarazmians are really taken down from their high water mark by Genghis Khan during the invasion of the Mongol Empire from 1219 to 1221. However, the civilization does continue on for a bit longer, and I'll talk a bit more about that in a second. Now, I want to think about arguments sort of pro and con for having them in the game, and I'm going to start off with the con. So the civilization's not around that much as a power in the region from a temporal perspective. Again, it's less than 200 years. We already have a number of Turkic civilizations in the game, and that presents a real challenge to carve out a civilization with its own unique niche. We have 43 civilizations in the game now, so the task in general of making unique civilizations has actually got even harder. And I'd say lastly, the sort of popular history of the civilization, if you were to just ask somebody, well, I don't want to say on the street, but somebody, just what do you know about the Khwarazmians, it probably would come back to getting invaded and defeated by the Mongols. And so some people might react that we don't need a civilization in the game that doesn't really have its own history of success. I'm not saying that view is right, but that might be the reaction. Alright, so now let's talk about why we should think about adding them into the game. The Khwarazmians, even though they're not around for a terribly long period of time, this is a fairly large empire when we think about geography. To put this into context, here we have an excerpt from a very official Wikipedia entry on largest land empires, and we see that the Khwarazmians rank up here, and the Kievan Rus and the Mamluk Sultanate rank actually even maybe a bit below, and those would be the in-game Slavs and Saracens. So the territory of these civilizations is pretty comparable, and I think therefore we can feel justified in saying that at least from a geographic perspective, the Khwarazmians were fairly significant. But when we add a new civ to the game, we don't want to just think about its significance in terms of how large it is, but also does it have a good story? Are there interesting characters? Are there, basically, is there a history that is worth remembering? And I think the Khwarazmians do bring this into the game. You could easily theme a campaign around Jalal ad-Din, a military commander and the successor of Shah Muhammad II, who comes to prominence during this time. And he is somebody who is in his early 20s when the Mongol invasions are occurring, so you can imagine how wild that would be to be so young and Genghis Khan is on your doorstep. But not only that, he's fairly successful. He, at the Battle of Parwan, defeats a Mongol army, which is a victory that does resonate throughout the empire at the time. And even though he ultimately loses at the Battle of Indus River and has to flee into India, he spends about a decade trying to resurrect the Khwarazmian Empire. Now, he doesn't entirely succeed, but that would be an interesting story to tell. And I would say also when it comes to Jalal ad-Din, he does have a connection to the Georgians, which would also be in this DLC, because he inflicts a major defeat on them at the Battle of Garni, and so we could tell that story as well. Additionally, the Khwarazmians, after the death of Jalal ad-Din in 1231, do exist for about a decade and a half as a sort of mercenary group, and they wind up playing an important role during the Crusades. So again, I think you have another really interesting story you could tell about the twilight of the Khwarazmian Empire, and for those reasons, we have some justification for adding them to the game. What are some of the themes that we want running through this civilization? Well, again, I mentioned we have a large land empire that features the Khwarazm Oasis and some densely fortified cities, so we want to try and find a way to bake that into the design. Additionally, the Khwarazmians were known for having the potential to field a large army, but never quite had the logistics and organization and discipline to pull that off. So we want to somehow capture that when we think about their unit tech tree. Lastly, as I mentioned in the history section, this is a Turco-Persian empire, so we want to take those Turkic concepts, but also think about the Persians as well when we flesh out what kind of bonuses and unit availability that the civilization will have. Now I want to quickly run through these civ bonuses, and I will do a bit more detail on each one of these after the slides, so just stick with me here for a moment. The Khwarazmians are identified as a cavalry and archer civilization and have the following civilization bonuses. You start off with 1 farm and plus 75 wood. Your economic buildings regenerate HP. Stable units gain +1 melee armor in the Castle Age and +1 pierce armor in Imperial Age. Parthian Tactics provides additional bonus damage versus all infantry. And your team bonus is that foot archers inflict +1 damage versus cavalry archers. Okay, let's kick things off with your first direct economic bonus, starting with 1 farm and 75 extra wood. The idea here is we want to take into account the idea of a large land empire that's benefiting from the Khwarazm Oasis and the region in general. What this gives you as a civilization is a very smooth opening if you're going for scouts and archers. I tested this in the scenario editor, doing a 19 pop scout rush and 20 pop archers, and if you lure in a deer, it does feel very smooth. The basic idea here is that in scout and archer openings, the hope would be that you could afford both of your eco upgrades and still produce units, and that will help you a bit later in the game in early Castle Age because your farms will last longer and it will let you spend that initial wood and resources on something else, which allows this bonus to have a little extra effect later in the game because this is your only direct eco bonus. You can compare this bonus with the Persians that start with 50 food and 50 wood, and at first blush this bonus seems a lot better. It's more wood and a farm has 175 food. However, remember, you're not getting the food from that farm for free. You have to utilize a villager in order to farm that farm and get the food that way. So that villager could be doing something else. The Persians, right, they're getting that 50 food just for free from the jump. And so that means that that villager in the Persian economy in the Dark Age can do something else. Now, I do think that this is a better bonus in some ways than the Persian version. However, remember that the Persians are getting economic bonuses in the Feudal Castle Imperial Age with faster working TCs, whereas the Khwarazmians are pretty dependent on squeezing as much juice out of this civilization bonus so that way you can get off to a nice start. The second civilization bonus is kind of an indirect economic one, that your economic buildings regenerate HP. We're trying to mimic the characteristic of the Khwarazmians having large, densely populated, fortified cities, and what this is going to get you is it's basically just going to make it more difficult to take out your town. It does have some parallels with the Persian bonus of having more HP on your town centers, but remember, this is affecting a number of economic buildings, and when you couple this with repair villagers and mangonel pushing, right, it's going to make your villagers have an easier job keeping those buildings up, resisting mangonel pushes. It's going to make it a little bit more difficult for like say large armies in the mid game, being able to just raid your base and take out your town centers, that kind of thing. What this means for the opponent is that if you want to try and take out the Khwarazmians essentially before the late game, it means that you're going to have to invest a lot more. And if you fail, then that means that was a major opportunity cost that you participated in, and that can have pretty strong consequences for how the game goes on. Now we move into our military bonuses, starting off with the bonus that stable units gain +1 melee armor in the Castle Age and +1 pierce armor in Imperial Age. What I want to reflect here is that when I was doing the research for this video, I found that the Khwarazmian armies were pretty similar in a lot of ways to their Turkic counterparts and even the Mongols, but one of the main differences was that, especially in comparison to the Mongols, the Khwarazmians were known for being a bit better armored, and so I want to embed that into this bonus. And what this does is it means that in the mid game, your melee cavalry with that +1 pierce armor, you're going to have a marginal edge over your other melee units that you're up against. And then in the late game, you have melee cavalry that's actually fairly strong against archers. Now, this isn't going to tell the whole story. We have to really wait until we get to the blacksmith, actually. But I'll just let you guys know up front that basically in the late game, the Khwarazmians become a civilization whose stable units are built a lot more around durability and being able to take a punch rather than being able to deliver a punch with raw power. Anyways, we'll get to that. Our second military bonus is that Parthian Tactics gives additional bonus damage versus infantry. The idea here is we want to reflect the sort of strong artisanship of the region. And what this is going to get you is an additional +2 damage against units that have the infantry armor class. This means it's going to give an additional 2 damage against spearmen, and that'll help your light cav out, but it also is going to work against swordsmen. And now with the Gambeson's technology in the game, this is actually a really nice bonus because it's going to help you thin out those units and counter the fact that now swordsmen have that extra pierce armor. So this is really going to put cav archers on the table as, I would not say a hard infantry counter, but a unit that won't struggle as much as perhaps some other civs and cav archers. Lastly, we want to talk about the team bonus of foot archers doing +1 damage versus cavalry archers. What I'm trying to incorporate here is the fact that at the Battle of Parwan, Jalal ad-Din ordered his archers to dismount and fire on the Mongol cav archers from on foot. So that just spells out a nice Arbalest bonus for us. And what this does essentially is that from a population efficient standpoint where we have an equal number of units, cav archers are still going to win. But Khwarazmian Arbalists are going to trade much better than generic fully upgraded ones. And when we think about cost efficiency, when we have more Khwarazmian crossbowmen or Arbalists, crossbowmen and Arbalists from generic civs tend to win those trades, except when they're up against fully upgraded heavy cav archers. The extra +2 pierce armor from Parthian Tactics tends to swing fights in favor of cav archers, even from a cost efficient perspective. Khwarazmian Arbalists, though, will essentially fight evenly with even fully upgraded cavalry archers. So that's what this bonus is getting us, and that's a nice little sweet spot that we settle into. Okay, now I want to get into these civilizations' unique attributes, and let's start off with the unique unit. I'm probably butchering the pronunciation, so I apologize, but the unique unit here is the Wafidya. And this is a term that is essentially a collective noun that referred to various ethnic groups who were mercenaries in the Mamluk Sultanate, and the Khwarazmians were a pretty important one of those, especially during the Crusades in the 1240s. And so that's really where we want to take the inspiration for this unit. Essentially, the Wafidya is a cross between a heavy camel rider and a steppe lancer. So it has HP that is basically between the two, it has base attack that is between the two, it's got a little more melee armor, not a ton of pierce armor, but where the Wafidya really earns its keep is that it has a high rate of fire, it's slightly faster than a camel. Camels have 1.45 speed, Wafidya are a little bit faster, and you also have the range of a steppe lancer, and you're still doing bonus versus cavalry. I think that the unit invites the comparisons the most with the heavy camel rider, and these are just some some numbers I sketched out looking at damage per second. Might not be entirely accurate, but I think I've got most of it. And basically, heavy camel riders will kill paladins in about 15 seconds, and they last a little bit longer, meaning they win that fight. And the same is going to be true for a unique unit. It kills paladins a little earlier, but it also dies a little earlier to them. So they're pretty even on the score. Both will be good counters versus heavy cavalry. And when we compare the units between one another, if we're talking about base attack, Ophidia, because it has a higher base attack than a camel and it has a higher rate of fire, is going to be much stronger versus non-cavalry options. Now, it is worth noting that you don't have any bonus damage versus camels, so if you are up against camels, you might want to go with the heavy camel rider. When it comes to melee durability, it's really close. I think that the Ophidia in the elite version has one more melee armor, but the camel's still doing pretty good and has more HP. When it comes to range durability, you should still be good on the camel with its higher HP and the extra pierce armor that you're getting in Imperial Age. When it comes to speed and range, the Ophidia has an advantage there. But when it comes to cost is where things get interesting. On a unit cost basis, the Ophidia is cheaper, but heavy camel rider is going to be a little bit easier to upgrade, so the upgrade cost is cheaper there. So at the end of the day, I think what we have here is, in your unique unit, a more versatile unit. So if you don't know what you're going to be up against, or maybe you're worried about a unit transition to something else, I think you go with the unique unit. If you want an anti-cavalry unit that is a specialist and you want to be able to mass produce it a bit easier, you might want to think about heavy camel. Alright, now let's get into the unique technologies, starting with the Castle Age. Duan removes the stone cost from town centers and bakes that into the wood. Again, we want to reflect this idea of having strongly fortified cities, and what this does is it really provides a lot of late game protection for your villagers. Remember, this technology does cost 200 stone, so it really only starts to pay for itself from an economic perspective, at least a direct economic perspective, once you make 3 more town centers after researching it. Remember, you have to get a castle to research it in the first place. But the amount of value that it can provide just from protecting your villagers in late game, I think has a lot more upside. Additionally, if you're trying to reboom, having more town centers on the map is really helpful. I don't think that this bonus helps you boom, because you probably don't have the wood in your economy to support just having a lot of town centers. But rebooming, I could see that being pretty helpful. Going into the Imperial Age now, we have the technology Ochar Caravans that reduces your enemy trade income. This is inspired by essentially the spark that ignites the Mongol invasion into the Khwarazmian Empire, where the uncle of Shah Muhammad II takes the riches of some of Genghis Khan's trade ambassadors, and so it's nice to be able to make this a part of the game. And really what this does is it helps you break those late team games where they essentially become trade wars. A Khwarazmian opponent will need to make more trade carts to support an army, meaning they have less population space for military. And so that can help Khwarazmian teams actually win the day. Okay, now let's get into the blacksmith, starting with the archery range. You have great foot archers and great cavalry archers. You get full upgrades, and each of those units does have a little bonus, right? Arbalists are going to be doing more damage to cav archers, and cav archers, the Parthian tactics, gives you a little bit more bonus damage versus infantry. It's worth noting you don't have hand cannoneers. The bonus from Parthian tactics, I think, helps out a little bit, but it doesn't fully replace the role that a hand cannoneer would perform. It just means that your cavalry archers are going to be a little bit better if you find yourself up against infantry. But at the end of the day, this is a very strong archery range, and I think a hallmark of the civilization. So at first blush, this does not appear like a barracks that is that bad. Yeah, you miss champion, but you do get all of the other upgrades. So you do have two-handed swordsmen with gambesons, which seems like it could have some situational utility. However, the technologies at the barracks don't tell the full story, and we're going to have to wait to the blacksmith in order to get there, but it is worth knowing you do have decent halberdiers, and gambesons is nice for your swordsmen. Looking at the stable, you can see there's a lot of versatility, and in the mid-game, having that extra +1 melee armor is going to mean that you should have a good chance of winning close fights. Now in the late game, things get really interesting because having one extra pierce armor can provide a lot of utility, enabling your cavaliers to go from taking 35 shots from an arbalist to 47, your heavy camel riders will take more shots, and even your light cavalry are going to be better against archers in terms of absorption of pierce damage than even fully upgraded hussars. You can also take a look at the Step Lancer. Remember, it's going to be getting a little bit more armor as well. Now again, when we get to the blacksmith, I think we'll be able to tell the full story behind the stable, but know that you should have pretty good durability in your stable units regardless. Even though you are missing things like Paladin, you still have pretty good options at the stable. The Siege Workshop is pretty rough. You miss out on a lot of the key upgrades, though at least you do get things like onagers and heavy scorpions. Alright, we finally arrived at the blacksmith, and as you can see, the civilization misses blast furnace. So now we can think about how the infantry will play out, in that even though you have two-handed swordsmen with gambesons, missing blast furnace means that that's a unit that's not going to be putting out a lot of damage potential. It also means that your halberdiers are not fully upgraded, and so will struggle when they are up against generic, fully upgraded halberdiers. Additionally, when it comes to your cavalry, this is the aspect that starts to skew the identity of your late game cavalry more towards durability. If it's a cavalier versus cavalier fight, having just +1 melee armor is still going to leave you down sort of like 1 net damage, and you should lose those fights. So it's this technology, this is a major limitation of the Civ, and it's really what gives the late game aspect of the Civ its identity. Now remember, you have all of your armor upgrades, so you'll have units that have a lot of stamina that should have survivability, but you will lack that raw power on the battlefield. Taking a look at the dock, it's pretty limited to reflect the fact that we are dealing with what is primarily a land empire. A lot of technology is missing. The university and the monastery are good but not great. Notably, you have the building upgrades for more HP and armor, which is nice, and you do get siege engineers. So that's going to be helpful, but remember you lack a lot of upgrades at the Siege Workshop. Herbal medicine can help you heal troops, and block printing can give you a little bit of range if you want to, say, convert units from a distance, but you do lack redemption, so it's not going to help you against siege. And lastly, the economy. You don't miss any eco upgrades. This is because you don't really have a direct eco bonus outside of the Dark Age, and we're just trying to compensate the Civ for that. Having said that, now with gold shaft mining and stone shaft mining being cheaper, this actually could provide a bit of an eco boost for the civilization, so it'll be interesting to see how this would actually play out. Okay, now that we've gone through the civilization design, we want to take a look at the strengths and weaknesses, because what we want to end up with is a civilization that is competitive but not broken, in that it's either too strong or too weak. So starting off with these strengths, you have a very fluid early game, and you have a unit tech tree that not only gives you versatility, but actually gives most of your units good survivability. And not only that, but your towns, your villages are going to be difficult for opponents to conduct raids, to assault, and I think at least in the mid-game, to siege. And so you have a geography that also lends itself to survivability. And lastly, I think that this could be a strong flank civilization, given the fact that your arbalists are very good, and that you have the late game technology to reduce enemy trade. Okay, so now where the weaknesses come in. Well, you don't have that strong of a mid-game economy. You're kind of depending on the fact that you're difficult to raid to help protect your economy, but that's not going to help you save boom and get into the next age and get your population up to 200. Additionally, your offensive melee options are limited once you get to the late game because of missing blast furnace, and you don't have very good siege, and that also makes it difficult to go on offense with this civilization. And lastly, I would just say, when we're thinking about like hybrid maps, this is probably not the Civ you want. The fact that your docks can regenerate some HP might be nice, but you just don't have the tech tree to support extended water play. Let me take a moment now and talk about some ideas that I considered but decided just didn't fit the civilization. I considered giving the Khwarazmians elephants. There is a historical fit given the association with the Gurids, but Elephants, even without Blast Furnace, to me feel like too much of a power unit, and it doesn't fit the civilization identity. I thought about allowing the free farm be able to be deployed whenever, so you could wait until Feudal Age to use it and basically research Horse Collar and get a free farm. But I like the uniqueness that this gives the start and the sense of geography that it creates. And in a game that has so many civilizations, I think anything that we can do to make a civilization even just look more unique is a plus. I did consider allowing the arrows from your defensive structures to just ignore Pierce Armor, but it felt overpowered, especially when combined with the D1 technology. The civilization feels a bit unrateable at that point, and it just seemed like too much. Now, I also considered the economic building regeneration of HP applying to all buildings, but I felt that that was too overpowered in the early game when feudal military doesn't have a very high attack value, and it just doesn't seem to work. I also think it tends to, if you give them the bonus to walls or buildings, the civilization can be typecast as defensive, and I don't think that this is a defensive civilization at the end of the day. Lastly, the Foot Archer attack, I thought about making it +2 and having it be staggered, one in Castle Age and another bonus in the Imperial Age, but honestly, when I did the testing, just having +1 attack really has a massive impact on how fights turn out, because pierce damage is usually so low that just one additional attack or one additional armor can have a pretty significant result. So I decided that the team bonus is pretty good as it stands. Okay, now let's just take a moment to take stock of the civilization and consider how they would play out in most games. The Khwarazmians have a nice flow to their early game that leads into a versatile yet capable mid-game, and in the late game emphasizes durability, both in terms of unit survivability and the difficulty that opponents will have raiding. Now, the civilization, I think, can be summarized as not really having a knockout punch, but also being difficult to knock out, because you do miss Blast Furnace, a number of siege upgrades, gunpowder, but your durability and defenses can help keep you in the game and balance things out. The Khwarazmians want to create strategic mismatches, and what I mean by that is that you typically want to be on a different unit composition than your opponent. If your opponent is making archers, you want to take advantage of that +1 pierce armor in your cavalry. If your opponent is on infantry, Arbalest might do a good job, but also cavalry archers with the Parthian tactics bonus could be a pretty strong unit. And if your opponent's on cavalry, despite missing Blast Furnace, your camels and halberdiers are serviceable, and your unique unit is also going to be a nice anti-cavalry counter. This is a civilization that fits the mold of that AOE2 adage of being difficult to push against and difficult to push with. I want to take a moment to compare and contrast with three very different civilizations in the game: the Mongols, Byzantines, and the Britons. The Mongols have some similarities with the Khwarazmians: a nice early game start, a lot of unit variety you can go for in the mid game, but whereas the Khwarazmians emphasize armor upgrades at the expense of raw power, the Mongols are a civilization with their strong siege and the high DPS from their Mangudai, where the Mongols have a lot of offensive potential, but don't really have the same kind of durability that the Khwarazmians would have. The Byzantines are another interesting comparison. Now, I think the Byzantines are another civ that likes to create strategic mismatches. However, the Byzantines have a very different playstyle and flow of their game. Byzantine players tend to turtle up, play a bit slower of an early game, and then push out later in the game when your tech tree opens up a lot of possibilities, such as cheap, low-quality counter units and gunpowder, such as bombard cannons, bombard towers we see a bit more lately, etc. The Khwarazmians, though, you get off to a really nice start, and so even though you have durable units in the late game, this is not a civilization in the Khwarazmians that you want to play defensively. You do want to send your army into the battlefield and fight, because it is a high quality army, but you do have to pay a full price for it. And so I think that this civilization, whereas the Byzantines are appropriately classified as defensive, the Khwarazmians, even though they also have a reactive sort of play style, you do not want to play them as a defensive civilization. you do want to hit the open battlefield. Lastly, we can look at the Britons. The Britons, I think, are an interesting comparison because they definitely fit this adage of being difficult to push against and difficult to push with, but they do it by essentially specializing around one unit and also having really strong siege with your trebuchets. The Khwarazmians, on the other hand, don't really specialize in a unit in particular, but nevertheless, they do fit this same mold. And I think that taking all of this in summary, the fact that we can look at the Khwarazmians and see three very different civilizations in the game and be able to discuss how the Khwarazmians might be similar, but also how they would play out very differently, suggests that not only we have a civilization here in the Khwarazmians that has a unique identity, but also one that should be competitive in gameplay. And at the end of the day, that's exactly the kind of civilization we would want to add to Age of Empires 2 DE. With that being said, we are done with this video. We are at the end. Thank you for making it to the end, and as I promised, I would tell you the next civilization concept in our hypothetical Masters of Eurasia. We're going to be looking at the Khitans. We're going to be moving east. The Khitans, also known as the Kharkhitai, the Western Lao dynasty, are going to be the focus of our next civ concept, and I'm really looking forward to it. And let me know in the comment section if you are as well. That being said, guys, Jim James 59, and I'll see you out there in the ladder. Peace.